Hello, welcome back to I Create For You. Today we're going to do another spooky Yellowstone story. I don't really think this one has a ghost in it when I reviewed it a little bit, but we're going to go through it anyway. It's called The Death Pit by Tower Junction in Yellowstone. It was a fair day in the summer of 1939 when they loaded up the car to drive out to the work site. The mountains still had snow on their peaks, but the valleys were bursting with flowers after the spring melt. The air through the windows smelled of fresh grass and sagebrush. Johnson inhaled deeply as the other members of his work crew chatted cheerfully with the supervisor. There were 3 lads assigned to the crew pit at the proposed bridge site just east of Tower Junction: Bill Nelson, Vaughn Rowley, and himself. He was the youngest of the 3, just turned 18, but Nelson was the newest employee, having joined the staff 13 days ago. The men worked for the Bureau of Public Roads, and today's assignment was fairly simple. The BPR regularly gathered information on the ground formation at a new work site before embarking on a project. To this end, a 26-foot shaft had been sunk at the proposed bridge site, and the men were to continue working on the shaft during their shift. When their supervisor dropped them off at the site at 8:30 a.m., Johnson took a quick, appreciative look at the flowing river below them, at the snow-capped mountains, and the meadow flowers beginning to bloom. A bison grazed in the distance, ignoring the humans on its turf. "Stop daydreaming, Johnson," Nelson called cheerfully. "It's time to get to work." Raleigh would take the first turn at the bottom of the shaft, which measured 5 feet by 6 feet at the bottom. Johnson grinned as Raleigh and his colleague placed his feet into the bucket that was used to lift and lower men into the narrow space. Grabbing the handles of the hoist, Nelson and Johnson slowly lowered Raleigh into the pit. Johnson saw Raleigh gasp and sway a bit around the 20-foot mark and wondered what was wrong with his friend. Raleigh quickly recovered himself, and he seemed fine when he reached the bottom of the shaft. As Johnson turned away from the hoist, Raleigh gave a sudden shout. "Bad air, Johnson! Nelson, pull me up!" He stepped back into the bucket and gestured for them to raise it. Johnson and Nelson whirled back to the hoist. As they turned the handles, Raleigh swayed dizzily and fainted, falling out of the bucket. "Raleigh!" Johnson screamed, leaning over the pit in consternation. "I'll go down," Nelson said, catching a hold of the rope. Nelson swung himself into the shaft and slid down the rope while Johnson watched apprehensively from the top. Suddenly, Nelson's grip loosened and he dropped from the rope, falling precipitously into the pit. He landed in a corner not far from Raleigh's prone body. Nelson must have been overcome by the bad air, Johnson realized, his heart pounding with panic. Now there were 2 men in the pit, breathing who knew what kinds of bad fumes, and only one of them left to rescue them both. There's the death pit illustration. Johnson leaned over the pit, wondering if he should climb down himself. Then he reconsidered. If Nelson and Raleigh couldn't breathe down there, how could he? And if he was overcome himself, there would be no one to rescue his friends. They could all die. What should he do? Time was ticking away, and every second the workers below were breathing in toxic fumes. Johnson's panicked eyes fell on the bucket lying in a beam of sunlight deep in the pit. Raleigh's feet were still trapped inside. Maybe, just maybe, Johnson could pull him out of there. Please, God. Grabbing the hoist handle, Johnson began hauling on the rope. Slowly the bucket rose into the air, 5 inches, then 10. Raleigh slowly rose with the bucket, his body flopping this way and that. Johnson prayed as he had never prayed before while the bucket bumped its way to the surface. His sweating hands slipped all over the handle as Johnson carefully hoisted his friend upward. Please, God, don't let him fall, he prayed. When the bucket drew to the top, Johnson lunged forward and grabbed Raleigh, hauling him out of the pit with a strength he did not know he possessed. Stinking yellow foam boiled out of Raleigh's nose and mouth as Johnson dragged him through the loose dirt and stones and laid him in a shade of nearby sage. "Wake up, Raleigh, wake up," Johnson gasped, shaking his friend. "Breathe. The air is clean here. Breathe." After a few heart-stopping seconds, Raleigh took a huge breath of fresh air and then another. Johnson hovered over Raleigh until his friend was breathing normally. Then he ran back to the pit to check on Nelson. Nelson was huddled on his stomach in the far corner of the pit. Johnson could hear his ragged, unsteady breathing. Remembering the yellow foam leaking out of Raleigh's nose and mouth, Johnson feared that every breath Nelson took might be killing him. He had to go for help. Johnson ran back to Raleigh, who sat up groggily. "Nelson is still down in the shaft," Johnson said urgently. "I have to go for help. Keep an eye on him until I get back with the ranger." Raleigh nodded weakly, and Johnson sprinted toward the Tower Ranger station. "Hurry, hurry!" His heart pounded the frantic message as Johnson ran faster than he'd ever run before, sprinting through rocks and sagebrush until he came in view of the ranger station. He started shouting as soon as he entered the driveway, and the ranger flew out the door to meet him. "Accident! Bad fumes in pit! Man trapped at bottom!" he gasped, bending double from a stitch in his side. Johnson bounced impatiently on his toes while the ranger called for backup, mentally urging the men to hurry. The ranger grabbed some ropes, and they rushed out to the car as several men arrived to assist with the rescue. When they reached the work site, the rescue party found Raleigh swaying beside the pit with a hoist rope in his hands. He was trying without success to lasso the rope around Nelson's foot or arm so he could pull his colleague to the surface. Taking the hoist rope from Raleigh, the ranger tied it around the chest of a man called Brutus. Then the ranger gave Brutus a second rope to tie around Nelson's body to the rescuers, so the rescuers could haul the stricken worker to the surface. As Brutus descended into the dim shaft, he was overwhelmed by the smell of sulfur. Fumes filled his nose and mouth, and he slumped against the rope, immediately losing consciousness. Alarmed, the men pulled Brutus back to the surface. "I'm going down there," Raleigh said as they carried the unconscious man a safe distance from the pit. He grabbed the hoist rope and tied it around his chest. "You can't, Raleigh. The fumes are too bad," Johnson protested. "You passed out the last time you went down there." "I'll hold my breath on the way down. That should give me enough time to get the loop around Nelson," Raleigh said. "Hurry! Nelson's still breathing in those noxious fumes." Taking a deep gulp of fresh air, Raleigh held his breath as the men lowered him into the pit. He ran out of air as he reached the bottom of the pit and gasped desperately for breath. Noxious fumes filled his lungs, and Raleigh swayed dizzily. "Come on, Raleigh," Johnson urged as his friend staggered forward, fighting to stay conscious. With visible effort, Raleigh forced trembling hands toward the prone worker and slipped the rope around Nelson's foot. Then he passed out beside the stricken man. "Haul them out," shouted the ranger. A few tense moments later, Raleigh's body was eased over the lip of the pit, followed by Nelson. Stinking yellow foam fountained out of Nelson's nose and mouth as the rescuers laid him in the shade. Nelson had been in the pit near around 20 minutes, by Johnson's reckoning, and was in bad shape. Raleigh, not feeling well himself, was also dribbling yellow foam from mouth and nose. The ranger began first aid immediately, and the two men were rushed to the hospital over in Mammoth. Raleigh survived the terrible ordeal, but Nelson died the next day. It was later determined that the death pit was filled with toxic amounts of hydrogen sulfide and carbon dioxide. The experts decided it was a lethal dose of hydrogen sulfuric gas that killed Nelson. A new study of the noxious gases that sometimes leaked into the pits and caves around Mammoth and northern Yellowstone was commissioned following the deadly incident. Mammoth's Devil's Kitchen and other caves were found to contain dangerous levels of carbon dioxide and were immediately closed to tourism. They remain closed to this day. Okay. Now I'm kind of surprised reading that they didn't, I mean, like, if they did this, maybe this was the first time they've come across these gases, that they didn't have some form of air tanks or, some kind of oxygen masks or something to help them out. So I'm just guessing that they didn't either have that equipment back then, because it didn't really give a time, like a year or whatever. But I'm just guessing that either they didn't have the equipment back then, or it was the first time coming across it, so they weren't readily prepared with that kind of equipment. Either way, the poor guy, just newbie on the job, and he was already a victim. Okay, I'm going to try to just try to do the pit itself. Let me make sure. I'm going to put you guys down close to me. Okay. Walls of the pit. This is if we could see in the pit. This is the top of the pit. Now we know that it's kind of cylinder-like, sort of like having a well. I wonder if it was just gas that was under the earth that was doing that, or did they accidentally puncture something? I don't know. Well, I'm guessing, they had these gases too, that I remember, not necessarily gases, but when I was visiting Yellowstone with my son and his family, it was like, if you go to where they have the hot springs and stuff, and the fumes, the steam would be coming off, you could have slightly smell sulfur. I mean, it wasn't really bad, but some areas it was a little bit stronger than others. But you were far enough away from some of them that it wouldn't have affected you. But it's still the idea that, it was there. Okay. So, I'm going to draw Nelson at the bottom of the pit. It's just horrible that he lost his life doing his job. But his sacrifice may have saved other people, because they did do studies on the other caves and stuff, and because of them testing the air and stuff, they had actually closed them, so it stopped other people from passing away, I guess I want to say. I'm trying to choose my words because YouTube can be a little weird with stuff. So, trying to, let me see if you can see. I'm just trying to choose my words carefully. I mean, I know it was in the story, but I just don't know if I just don't want to, not that I'm monetized right now either, like it would really matter, but it's the idea. Yeah, I don't need to have strikes on me before I even get really started. Okay, he's stuck down there in the pit. I guess they're hoisting a rope down here. Yeah, it's, I guess it would be a really scary thing, but, I can't imagine. That must have been scary for that guy to see him come out of that other guy come out, one of his colleagues come out that with that stuff coming out of his nose and mouth too. That's some quick gas. I mean, sheesh. Whatever happened with putting a, I know this doesn't sound nice either, but putting a bird down to make sure that the air is safe, you know. I know they used to do that in caves and stuff. That's what the miners used to do. I believe they used to take a canary or some kind of bird down, and if it passed away, they knew that they couldn't go in that area. So yeah, it's just, this is his buddy that was already down there once, and he's almost passed out at the top of the, trying to get that around him. I'll just try to make some kind of loop here. So what I'm gathering is they had a bucket, and let me look and see if they had the picture in here. That they had a bucket. Now, how does someone even fit in that bucket? But I don't know. I'm just guessing that it was like a bucket that they stood in. So we're going to try to draw some kind of bucket here that they can, and this is hoisted around it, and then it comes up on the other side. So that's what I'm figuring. That's how they take the people down, and for that guy to be able to pull him up with that rope, I mean, like, it's just, well, I guess when you get in, they say when you get in certain situations and it's like a emergency thing, it's your adrenaline is what helps you to you have superhuman strength, in other words. So that is my interpretation. I know it isn't a very good one, but it's a guesstimate of, you know, this guy, he can't breathe. I mean, I wonder how far down it was, because the other guy said he wasn't far down, and then, because obviously when they're up here at the top, they didn't smell anything, or they probably wouldn't have gone down in there. I mean, like, I wouldn't have. I would have said, hey, no way, I'm smelling something's not right. I think we need to do a reading on it before we go down there. And I guess that's what they should have done, but they didn't do anything like that. So instead, it became a death trap. So yeah, and unfortunately, Nelson lost his life. At least one of them survived that ordeal, but still. Okay, that's the best I can do. I'm gonna pan out here. There's the pit, the death pit. Poor Nelson down here, Raleigh up here trying to work his magic that he doesn't have anymore, but yeah. And this is the book to come from. Thank you so much for stopping by and listening to the spooky story. And we shall have a few more. I'm looking in this book, and there are some that repeat themselves from the other book that I did. So I'm trying not to do those because I don't want to repeat myself. And so that's why I'm jumping all over the book. See, like we just started this book. I'm at the end already, but I'm like jumping around in here trying to figure out which ones are going to be suitable and aren't a repeat. And then after this book, I have, I think I either had the Gettysburg ones, or I have another one, but I can't remember what it was called. But we'll check it out. Please give me a thumbs up if you like the content. Wednesday is whatever Wednesday that's coming up next. Please subscribe if you haven't. It doesn't really cost anything. In fact, it's free, and I'm begging for subscribers. I mean, I'm at the point where I could do a live if I wanted to, but I got to get my what's the word I'm looking at? I can't think of the word I'm looking at. I gotta not be so afraid is what I to do one. And whatever Wednesday it's coming up. So I'm trying to figure out what I want to do for that. And so if you have any suggestions now for whatever Wednesday, shoot them down into the comments and I will check them out. And hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of your Monday. Bye bye for now.